Hi, I'm David. This is Build to Succeed from Very Good Ventures. Today we talk with Andrew Tunall, President and Chief Product Officer at Embrace. In this episode, we learn from Andrew about his experience as a product owner, as well as the critical business impact of observability in modern applications. So let's go build some knowledge. Hey, Andrew. All right. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Let's get us started. Wanted to get us loose and get us going. So a lot going on in tech these days.
Yeah.
Curious in your space, what's maybe something that's kind of new and exciting for you and your team at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, like the AI boom is fully upon us. Like everyone's paying a lot of attention to it. I'll tell you, like, it's been pretty exciting to really think about how we evolve the way we work as product managers. I mean, obviously, my title is like Chief Product Officer. I do a lot more at Embrace in what I do. I kind of lead most of the organization, actually. But product. I've been doing product for 20 years. Is very much like the my passion, kind of inventing solutions to problems and building. Um, and like at no point in the past 20 years has it been easier for product managers to rapidly prototype and like come up with ideas quickly that they can vet with engineers. And as much as we are good as like conversationalists and, whiteboarders, especially in a virtual world, like there's nothing better than a really good artifact for people um, to go through. And that's been pretty cool from a work perspective. I'll say like from a personal perspective, it's not technology at all, but like I'm enjoying the summers finally here in Portland. I spent a lot of the year really excited. My wife's family is from Central Canada, and I'm suddenly a very big Winnipeg Jets fan. And they made it to the second round of the NHL playoffs. It's nothing quite like Stanley Cup hockey, and that's been great to watch. So yeah, it's been a good year.
Totally agree. Big hockey fan myself. You got to see it
Awesome.
live.
We'll,
Once you
we'll
see it
have to
live, you
grab a
get
couple
hooked.
beers when I see you in New York in a couple of weeks and chat about NHL.
100%. Absolutely. So I think, you mentioned a lot about product in your 20 years
Yeah,
in that space. I also know you kind of have a unique background in terms of getting into this with your
yeah,
sort of history in economics and political science. And I was just
yeah.
curious if you could kind of give us the story of how you got to where you are today and maybe how some of those early experiences were formative for you.
Yeah, I mean, compared to people who are going directly into product management out of an MBA or a bachelor's degree in computer science today, like I definitely have a non-traditional background. But 20 years ago in the early 2000s, and I know I look incredibly young. Thank you for telling me. But like the 20 years ago, product management wasn't really a thing in the software world. Right. There were project managers, there were program managers, you maybe had product owners at some companies that were just learning about agile. Mhm. Largely software was built. I mean, the first gig I had was we had just done a web forms implementation on .NET, and like most of our software is still built that was installed software using VB.NET, and so it was very much like design first, go to engineers and have them build stuff out. And I think everyone who's my age or, I'd say like 30s or older definitely had probably experienced a workplace where you had the engineering team and then you had the business. And, the business would show up with somebody who had a marketing background or a pseudo technical background with ideas that were completely ungrounded in the reality of what software engineering teams could deliver. And I guess I was lucky enough to get into private industry where I had a background. My major was in political science and economics. So thinking about like, the broader socioeconomic impacts of policy decisions. But I minored in computer science. And so I had this weird background where I could talk to engineers. I mean, I grew up writing code, building my own apps, building my own machines, gaming. So like all my friends were software engineers, but I also understood what the business was trying to achieve. I could talk to our customers and kind of interpret their non-technical desires into something our engineering team wanted. And that was foundational in kind of like, setting trajectory. I did some product consulting a little bit after that. Eventually I joined a startup as a proper product manager. And from there, I mean, the last 10 years, I was at Amazon Web Services for almost 4 years as a technical product manager. And then I was at New Relic, where I grew from a principal PM building their cloud observability practice through leading as a VP.
Mm.
And then that was really the foundation as I thought about, a future executive role. Um, to really grow into a chief product officer and president of the company. So it's been a fun journey. I'll say, like, product management for people who join like proper tech companies today is a vastly different craft than it was 20 years ago, where like I can lovingly say it now because I'm not 22 doing it, but like the first companies I worked for, um, I was a turd polisher, honestly. Like, yeah, I got past a turd and my job was to turn it into gold. And, the one of two things happened. Like, it stayed a turd, in which case I got blamed, or I turned it into gold and then my boss took all the credit. And I think, like, so it's been like a really interesting evolution watching, people come out of college or MBA programs or computer science programs and actively want to be product managers and really think about the craft in a good way. And I think it's been good for the profession. I'm really excited to see what people who, now grew up using some of the lack of tools they had do when they start taking advantage of AI and stuff to really accelerate how we can innovate on behalf of our customers.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time. I've heard people say that the domain of product manager it really should be at the forefront of AI because they have all the thinking and toolkits and
Yeah.
skills of like properly defining what something should do. And now you have these tools that, like, if you know how to define what something should do, you have these tools that can really help you get it there.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting for the craft and profession.
Yeah, I would say not only product managers either, like designers.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting things to me is like, the startup cost for us building a new app or a new idea was so intense historically, where like you wanted to build a new API for your users, your engineers had to go spend weeks setting up a, MVC service, all the routes, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's like minutes or hours for them to go do all the infrastructure work, that it really means we now have more time as human beings to really invest around the developer experience. If you're building APIs or the user experience and usability tools, you can go rapid prototype 5 or 10 different options and actually think about that data exploration in a way that you can build much better software, not just more, build software, which was traditionally a challenge. Now build better software, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's take us through a little bit more of your story because we got to catch up to where you are today and his background of economics and political science into AWS, New Relic, and getting into product, making that choice, and now you're at Embrace.
Yeah.
And maybe take us through, maybe give us an intro of what Embrace is, and maybe back to the early vision of Embrace, and catch us up to where you are today.
Yeah. We'll say what we are today, and then I'll go back in time. Our product today is an observability platform focused on end users that helps mobile and web engineers basically build yet better user performance. Performance from like, how does your app actually function? The company is about 8 years old, and it was founded by a team that had built consumer mobile apps primarily in the gaming space. And it was really born out of their frustration of the things we've all experienced. And I think some teams very much still experience today, which was, an end user, a relative, the founder himself would be playing a game or using an app that was in their portfolio and experience a problem and immediately ask the engineering teams what happened. Now, like, sure, it's a founder one-off problem, but we get support tickets all the time where people are like, what happened? And was frustrated that too often, like the answer was cannot reproduce, or we don't know, we don't have the data, like everything looks fine from the metrics we see. And so his kind of like personal lived experience, at which he suspected many users were experiencing, wasn't matching the data sets they had. And so he kind of endeavored to build this product that was helping, we call it, one of our core features today, but I kind of call it a play-by-play. It's very analogous to if you're going to a box score for an NHL game, you click the play-by-play button in ESPN, you'll see a text-based reproduction of everything that they recorded that happened in the game. And that's the notion of kind of what he foresaw. Like, can we build the play-by-play of you as an end user using whatever app you're using? And by collecting all of that data, can we then infer the state you were in to therefore build patterns that help us understand the underlying problem you experience and therefore resolve it faster? And he didn't use the term at the time, but like in itself, that is observability, right? Which is collecting, all of the outputs, the observable outputs of a system so that you can infer state for a particular system or user, and therefore like understand what the overall problem that you're, and explore the overall problem that you're trying to solve. Mm. And so like we've been through a number of evolutions, right? Like I think, the 6-8 years ago, it wasn't wholly like unreasonable to have a crash reporter that didn't record everything you needed. I think like broadly speaking, a lot of that stuff are solved problems now. And a lot of the things we're helping customers solve now are like very like nuanced challenges with app startup time or render performance when they're
Mm.
processing different JSON payloads, or in the web space, like as they implement various business functionality in their React code, like what are the performance impacts of that and the perceived user experience? Because I think we all intuitively know that performance challenges to a user impact their engagement with your app. Most teams just don't measure it in a way that they can say what that impact is. And so I'd argue that that's a whole world of like reliability problems that most user-facing teams don't have very good visibility into today.
So when I think about this space, right, you have crash reporting, which you
Yeah.
mentioned, and I think that's sort of the default one that everyone's like, oh, when the thing crashes, we need to kind of know so that we can fix that.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah. I mean, it's
real
like
bug.
analogous to the blue screen of death, which again, I
Yeah.
also don't think like younger people know, because most people are on Windows machines nowadays,
Yeah.
but including me, like I'm a 100% Mac user, which is crazy because like 15 years ago, I, thought I was silly, but like, yeah, I mean, it's terrible. The app literally
Yeah.
goes away. You lose all your state. You start from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one is like analytics, which is like you program in some events and you can kind of see how
Sure.
users
Yeah.
step
You're
through.
tracking where David's going to see
Right.
whether or not he's doing the thing you expect him to do.
Yeah, right. And maybe conversions, did you buy, abandon a
Yep.
cart, whatever. And then this like observability reliability thing it sounds like it's deeper where it's like you're right, like there's this tracking of like, okay, well, in certain conditions when I open up the app, it takes we've all had that experience where you're like
Yeah.
try to get the app out to do something and it's like loading, you're refreshing, like what's going on? Like how do you know if you're an engineer if that's a network condition? Is it because the payload was super big? Like so that's sort of the thing that you guys are really trying to help out is make sure that
Yeah.
the overall experience for the user, even those little small moments that,
Yeah.
yeah, cool, got it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the way I kind of look at it is like in the early days of mobile, the companies that were first to it kind of built these experiences where using the app was compulsory. Like if Delta tells you the only way to check in for your flight is using the mobile app, you will tolerate quite a bit of discomfort because you really want to take that flight. But if you look at what's happening today with e-commerce brands, like everyone's got these apps out here. They're pushing notifications to you. They're giving you contextual hints. They're trying to get you to engage frequently with their digital properties because that casualness of engagement with the brand makes it more likely over time that through many successful engagements, you're likely to then convert. Because maybe you don't come with like a presupposition that you're actively shopping for that thing, but through many explorations, you become convinced that you actually are looking for it and you buy. If you start introducing like subtle performance degradation into there and it becomes painful enough for people to engage with that brand, eventually that translates to decreased conversions.
Mm.
And, you think about like even app startup in different states, cold startup versus warm startup. If you impact your warm startup by half a second and people are kind of constantly flicking in and out trying to do product research, and it's just long enough that it seems like the app's not working, the probability that they permanently disengage, and by that I mean like close the app and you lose the state, so you've force closed it, you're not crashing it, but you've lost the context that exists locally, or that I just background it and go do something else entirely is actually quite high. And so I think, the we're not trying to tell an analytics story necessarily, right? We're not trying to talk to product teams or designers and telling them people didn't like the green button rather than the blue button. But we are trying to tell them that like when people follow the path that you've designed for them, they're encountering all of these types of friction points that are due to performance that your failure to prioritize is going to ultimately impact your end business metrics. And like I've been kind of using, I'll try it out on you and see how it kind of links with you. But like, if you think about, obviously they are not APIs because they're not consumed by end applications. They're consumed by humans. But if you think about the APIs for your app, They are not, slash resource. They are create an account, log in, add item to cart, checkout, like view order, right? They're the things that your app does. And if while you're experimenting and evolving those, and especially in the age of AI, evolving them even more rapidly, you don't have a handle on whether or not you are doing harm or impacting people's journey through those APIs, through latency and errors. Like there's a whole world of reliability things you probably don't know about.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that's you're right. Like a lot of people are maybe not thinking about that level of detail. There's still like a lot of addressable market for this because it's a subtle thing, and everyone has that experience where you're waiting for it to reload, or maybe another case here, like in the example you were giving that led to this insight in the beginning. It's like it crashed. Like what happened? I think the other thing that happens, like when you get a spinner, it's loading. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
the internet must be bad, and it's like,
Right.
well, maybe not. Like
Maybe
there's
not,
something
right?
else.
And to you, that like the funny thing is, to a human being, like that feels like a me problem and semi-permanent. Like, oh, I must be in a dead spot, and so I'll just course close that app and go do something else.
Right.
And if like think about it in a if you're Uber Eats, or you're a fast casual restaurant like Chipotle, or you're a clothing brand that's running like a 1 hour sale for its most frequent customers. You hit people with a push notification, and then for some reason there's a performance aspect on your web that makes everyone believe that they're in bad internet connectivity. You've just paid some vendor a whole lot of money to push out a whole bunch of pushes to your population. You're running marketing campaigns. You builds it out in your CMS to completely flush it down the toilet because you've created disengagement friction for all your users. And
Yeah.
I guess I would posit that most teams don't have that level of visibility. So we think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a big shift here where, in terms of how organizations should think about observability, it's not like when you think about reliability, like of course everyone wants their app to be bug free. You want it to be high performance. People talk about these things, but what you're really highlighting is that these things aren't just a thing that's nice to have. This isn't just developers trying to create really good stuff. This is like real business value.
Real business value.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Real
and
money.
I'd even say like as you think about how your teams function from a software delivery standpoint, even if you take the end user effect out of the equation, and Charity talks about this quite a bit. Charity Majors, one of the co-founders of Honeycomb, who kind of really was forward thinking in how you use her technology platform to go answer kind of unknown unknowns. I think if you view like all of the telemetry and the representation of how your users are experiencing your entire system, your app, your APIs, your databases, et cetera, into account, that shared context between developers building that user experience, or the SDK or the library, and in the cloud-based systems that actually power it, is what leads software engineering teams to actually build really resilient, high-performing, excellent technology, right? Like if your front-end teams have no idea what the API payload is going to look like and how to go design an SDK to properly retry or consume that data, and can't have a two-way conversation about payload design because they know how their app is going to process it, then it's two teams operating without entire context and at least a very predictable results.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you implement these and you have these running in production, you have Embrace going, and you have this next level of observability and reliability, have you guys observed that it kind of fundamentally changes some of the team behaviors, cultures, and how they work together?
Yeah, I mean, I think so we work with a very large brand, and I guess that, there's publicly accessible information. You can kind of look around where our SDK is, but they run lots of experiments, like thousands of experiments across our customer cohorts. We've had them turn off experiments, and I think the team that originally adopted our product, and now it's got much wider adoption, they wanted to stop being the janitors, right? They wanted to go from a paradigm where they were putting the brakes on everything because they had some tidbit of information that told them something was wrong, to a team that was instilling best practices amongst every engineer in their organization, where they were measuring and improving and could run experimentation at scale with full confidence that they understand the after effects from a performance perspective around what's going on. It can make the right decisions for their users and business. And that's tremendously powerful, right?
Right.
Like if everyone talks about wanting to do experimentation, but like, do you have the right data in place? Do you have the right best practices in place? Do you have the right culture in place to do it? Because if the answer is no, having 1,000 different teams checking in code like the Wild West and shipping it within an hour with no QA, when, by the way, for like 15 years, front ends, mobile and web have basically operated on a QA heavy, like zero bug paradigm, not a shit fast and fix faster paradigm. And observability is really fundamentally in production is really about like ship it, because you're going to have the right visibility to know if it's broken, and then you can disable the feature flag and you're good to go. Instead of like, we're going to spend 12 weeks QAing this and hope we caught everything.
Yeah.
But when inevitably it breaks, we're not going to know.
No,
And
that's
and
all.
you just can't do that at scale.
Yeah, and that's like, I think that with crash reporting, like one of the things I've observed is like people that aren't really super familiar with the ins and outs of doing these things, they want like no crashes. Like if crash reporting is identifying something, it's like that's a problem. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
Realistically, like if we have a speed thing we're trying to do, we should be determining what level of error rate are we comfortable with
Yes.
that we can
Yeah,
identify
an
with
error
these
budget,
tools,
right? Like
and then
that's
fix.
been a thing that we've talked for in the digital transformation world for a long time. And
Yeah.
you just kind of have to live with they're going to exist. Like, especially in the Android ecosystem, you've got tens of thousands of potential device types from OEM. You've got many active versions of the OS. And then multiply that by the number of experiments you're running and teams actively checking and wanting to ship code and see whether it impacts user behavior. And suddenly, like it's a number of dimensions you can't possibly control for in a QA environment. The only way to do it is to see a representative and by the way, unpredictable user behavior, right? Like
Yeah, totally.
people trying to engineer their way around some objective they're trying to achieve that you didn't anticipate. And so, like, you take all those things to an account, and it's like, well, I don't know how a zero bug QA heavy approach can ever be right for that if your objective is to ship fast. The two are really incongruent. And I mean, this isn't like, I'm not saying everyone should ship fast. Like the world right now is gravitating toward a technology world with AI code assistance, where the pressure on every business is going to be to ship fast. And so if you don't build the right culture and tooling around it, like you will fall behind.
100%. So you're out there with a really cool product that you've have led the product vision and are leading the team in a lot of ways, and have really kind of positioned that forward where what you guys are doing and leading this charge of observability, reliability. So let's like dig into that. Like I'm curious, like let's get back to your product kind of ownership and your history there. Because you probably put some of these ideas to work even in your own tools along the way.
Yeah.
What were how did the Embrace product change over the years, and how did maybe the strategy change? And as a product leader, how did you sort of like validate each one of those inputs or opportunities as you went?
I'll rewind a little bit to my strategy around finding product market fit, because I think that's important context for like product managers and product leaders and when they think about opportunities. And like, especially in engineering driven organizations or as engineers ourselves, we tend to think of like, if there's a problem and I have a solution, everyone will want it. And that's just fundamentally untrue, right? Like, because chances are, especially now, there's many solutions to that problem, all of which solve it in some particular way, but all of it look the same. And so like a big book that I'm a fan of is The Purple Cow, which is really a marketing book, but is about like, how do you stand out in a crowd of cows that all look the same, right? Like, if you're driving, and the analogy is if you're driving down the road, you see a herd of cows, there will be small cows, big cows, brown cows, striped cows, mottled cows, white cows, black cows. But what if there was a purple cow? Like, amongst all those cows, the purple's the only one you're going to be like, well, that's unique. That deserves my attention. It's worth exploration, right? So, like, especially as an early stage company, we have to be a purple cow. We have to solve a problem in a new and unique way and a specific problem in a new and unique way that deserves people's attention, because we are too small as a company to go compete with others as just a generalist solution. We can't look like the rest of others and just carve out our 10% of the market and be truly large. And I mean, we're a venture funded startup backed by NEA. Like, we're in the business of building a growth business. And so just carving out a little bit of business and going about my day is not the game that I'm playing. The second bit is like this notion of how do you find product market fit? And I guess I've thought like this for a while, but I was listening to Lenny's podcast a year or so ago, and I can't remember. There's a venture fund that does a product market fit workshop, and they kind of put it into the structure that now I send to people um, as kind of a good resource because it mirrors how I think about it. And it's this notion of like the 4 Ps, which is it's not just the product, but it's the persona, the problem, and the promise. Which is to say, like, promise is your messaging, the problem is the problem you're solving, the persona is somebody who has to care about the problem and resonate with the promise, and then the product has to fit all of that, right? So if any one of those don't work, you don't find really radical product market fit to a degree that people are going to go adopt it and be like actively raising their hands and saying, "Hey, this is a unique problem you solve, and you alone kind of solve it, and it's worth my time and energy to shift from the status quo." So if you rewind in our history, right, we built a really unique kind of single feature, which was this user play by play, but then we largely fell into the trap of doing what everyone else was doing in the space. We built a really great crash reporter and sure was 30% better than what you could get at Firebase, but like it was still just a crash reporter and there were a lot of other people building crash reporters. It was a striped cow in a road full of cows or pasture full of cows. We built a bunch of other detection as well, right? It was tools in a toolbox, but it was really hard to discern what was materially different. And so like, I started a couple of years ago talking to leaders who were they kept telling me the same story, which was like our way of operating the app feels like it's just fundamentally dated. Everyone just goes into the toolbox and, they have a couple of things they fix. But like when we look at our app store reviews, we know people are kind of having a rotten time and we don't really know why. We know that there's probably like disengagement for reasons that we have no information around and we can't quantify what that looks like. And everyone just kind of goes, and because like there's no data, right? Other than I guess a gut feeling. And gut feelings are really hard to prioritize as product and engineering leaders when we have like an endless list of stuff that there's pressure to build. Unless that gut feeling is like tremendously strong and you're in a position of being able to leverage that political capital, especially in big organizations, retail organizations where maybe the leadership isn't grounded traditionally in tech. And so like as we kind of continued those conversations, I think what I started to realize is we needed to look different. We needed to look like a purple cow. We needed to we had a series of hypotheses and we needed to go codify them in a way that made us clearly different than the rest of our competitors. And there were a couple of things happening in the larger world. One was that like OpenTelemetry, which had been, really this evolution from a bunch of open standards to now the most contributed CNCF project was gaining gravity in the larger world. We were seeing very large corporations attempt to adopt it as their kind of standard observability language. Which was really important for sharing context between application teams, infrastructure teams, everyone doing observability. And, I think we realized that there was a huge opportunity in the market to really take a leadership position by firmly saying, okay, OpenTelemetry can be a really great way that people adopt observability across every part of your technology organization, including front end and mobile teams. And by kind of applying that leadership, maybe we can then also go solve this other problem we were seeing, which is more and more technology leaders asking, can you help me understand how all these problems we kind of believe exist correlate to whether or not a user is staying engaged with our app? And so I think I wouldn't call it a pivot at all, I'd call it an evolution, which was we went from this disparate toolkits to how can we start putting the pieces together. We have some really awesome stuff launching here soon, and I'm really, really, really excited for V2 of it, where we're really starting to apply machine learning and AI toward how do we help users really understand the things users were doing and the correlation of performance signals to whether or not they stay engaged, which is, I think, as you talk about like the real service level objectives for your end users, I mean, it would be pretty awesome, right? If like in your reliability dashboards, you could show the key things your users do in an app and whether or not you likely could correlate it to a recent change or reliability signal in your app. Because then it's like we didn't just release something users don't like. We released something that actually keeps them from liking it. And I think from a technology organization for a reliability culture, that's huge.
Yeah, that's totally. And what you guys are doing, it sounds like, is uncovering this information that otherwise was sort of mysterious. And so you could make a bunch of conclusions, like if you ship an update and you're not getting the business metrics you expected, and you could
Yeah.
say like, oh, the feature, no one wants the feature. And it could
Yeah.
just be like, no, the feature takes a second and a half too long to load.
Yeah.
And people are frustrated, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
it's,
mean, I think, if you were to look at like, and we, at app load time, I think is a good thing, is everyone has experienced that across every app they use. But if today, like every app has a unique value proposition, and there's probably a gradient with which users are willing to be patient during that app load time to experience that value proposition. For something like X, or formerly Twitter, that load time is very low because they have intentionally created a user interaction where I want instant gratification and I want it many times throughout the day.
mm,
For other apps, it may be quite long, right? But it's unique to your context. If you impact that, do you actually know what change that has on your users' willingness to stay engaged? And I would argue almost nobody does. And so, yeah, by uncovering that kind of information, I think people can just build better software, which is, I mean, that's really like our grander mission, right?
yeah. So you're now the president of Embrace as well,
Yeah,
right? And so you came up through product, right?
yeah,
And so how has that product driven sort of leadership role evolved over time? Now that you're in a executive position, kind of
yeah.
driving that, how is that, how has your leadership style maybe morphed over time? And I'm also curious how, in an organization where the product is really in a very senior position like that, and you've been so vital to the trajectory of this, how has it influenced the engineering culture and your ability to sort of like ship what people want?
Yeah. I mean, I'd argue, like, especially in technology organizations that are selling to developers, having people who come in through product or engineering backgrounds as the most senior levels of leadership is critical to them, like building an authentic brand, building them a product and go to market motion that is authentic and resonates with their user persona. I have seen companies that build really great products hire people with sales and marketing backgrounds who have no experience in the domain as their CEO, and the culture absolutely takes a nosedive. The product authenticity is no longer there, and the company is hosed as a result. Um, that said, right, like running a company at the most senior levels where you're doing more than like product or technology organization is a really hard gig. I mean, like we're a venture funded company. We burn negative as we endeavor to grow. My day includes everything from reviewing a like redlined customer NDA to stubbing in for one of our customer success people because we have a key customer and I need to get an upgrade done, to popping onto a sales call at 6 a.m. with a European customer, to, then sitting in a roadmap planning exercise with my PMs, or actually going through product details and mocks. The context switching can be nightmarish.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally not for everyone. And like, I think a couple lessons I've learned is you have to have really great, accountable, high ownership leaders around you. And say like, um, uh, I'd say ownership is probably under indexed in many organizations, which is like, are there people that you surround yourself with where you just know that they're going to get it done? Like, especially for a small company, those individuals are gold, because like if I can hand something to somebody and know they will find a way to produce a very high quality outcome, that's something on my plate I don't have to worry about, because I have the trust and relationship with them to know that if they start encountering a problem where they know it's not going to meet my standard, they're going to come to me proactively and we're going to work on it as a collaborative team. Instead of, I'm going to look at something and be like, this just doesn't meet my standard. How did it happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's been an interesting transition. It's been great for me. Like the reason I went from a very well compensated VP at New Relic, running a lot of product, to a much smaller company was largely because as I looked at my career arc, being a CPO and a senior leader at a pre-IPO or recent IPO company kind of necessitates you've done a lot of the gig before, even at a smaller scale. There's a lot of hard lessons you learn about managing people, about managing culture, about getting people excited, about making, communicating tough messages that you don't learn when you're kind of a functional middle manager, even in a large organization. You're insulated from a lot of it. And, in 3.5 years, I've learned a lot of those lessons, and they'll pay dividends for my career. So like that, there's lots of reasons to go to a startup. You get to learn brand new skills. You get to often like do things that are well above your pay grade. You get to define your role in many ways. Getting rich quick is not one of them, I will say. Like, not one of them. People think, oh, you go to startup, you're going to be a multimillionaire. It's like most of the time, and by most of the time, I mean 99% of the time, the answer is you will not. Like everyone likes to index on the outliers because otherwise nobody would be staying enough to do it.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of management lessons and sort of
Yeah.
entrepreneurial lessons you just rattled off in the last like 2 minutes or so. Totally agree with every single one of them, by the way, because I've gone through that same stuff as well. And
Yeah.
just the lessons you learn, it's hard to explain. You don't really learn them unless you really can experience them.
Yeah.
And it's just a truth. It's just not for everyone. And I think
Yeah.
the startup world does kind of like really put the successful startup founders on a pedestal. And you see,
Yeah.
even you look at the people who are really successful now, the sort of the true like the Jeff Bezos, Zucker, like these guys who are billionaire, like hundreds of billions, like, but they've also been doing it for a long time at
Yeah.
this
A long
point,
time.
and the amount of stress and things, and for every one of those, there's thousands of people that didn't make. Like we have we had a recording of this with our VC from Celesta, and I asked him about what it's like to be, what's surprising about being a VC, and he's like, actually, what most people don't know is like actually what I do is spend most of my time dealing with all the companies that aren't going well. The ones that are going
Yeah.
well, we don't talk about,
Yeah.
So yeah, so many of them don't go well, and so it is really tough. But maybe that's a good segue to a question around like, given what everything you've learned, in your product journey and in your startup journey and everything, like if you were to go back in time, like 5 years ago, kind of what would you tell yourself then that you think in retrospect you would have maybe kind of saved yourself a lot of stress?
That's a whole lot. 5 years ago, when I was still at New Relic, I mean, first of all, I didn't know New Relic would be like acquired by a private equity firm at the share price it was. So I probably should have stayed for my own pocketbook. But like, you can
Yeah.
always make more money. What you can't do is learn some of the lessons. I think like overall from a career perspective, the move was really good for me. My partner in crime, Eric, who primarily deals with like our strategic investors, he's one of the co-founders, their strategic customers, etc. He's been an incredible partner and taught me a ton. And, I think like, thinking about, and these are probably most relevant to VC funded startups. We had raised a fair amount of money. I think the 2020, 2021, 2022 world is not indicative of like the rest of history. And that like the spending mood of potential customers and the pressures from the VC community for companies to grow at all costs were unlike anything that like really could ever exist again in the future or really should. Mm. I think the taking I think if you go back in time, sometimes it's like rather than hire 50 people, maybe hire 10 who just have outstanding outstanding high ownership, who have outstanding um, contacts in the industry, who are just like absolute top performers, and we build smaller and better, and think about how we can just be we can over index on just batting above our weight before we grow. So I think a lot of companies make the mistake, and this happens at every level. Like I saw this at Amazon. You see it elsewhere, where they have something going good and then they grow to like 3 or 4 or 5 times their size, and suddenly like the culture that they had and all of the things that were really relying upon them having a very high bar internally and talent level and people who are executing well above their weight, it goes out the window, and suddenly the direction starts to tilt more toward mediocrity than excellence. Mm. So that's probably the number one, which is just like, how the now knowing the larger like economic uncertainty, the decline of like, the crazy SaaS multiples and people buying SaaS software. I probably would have said, how before we like grow like crazy or double down on what we think is working, how can we go from I convince myself to like the world is telling me because I can't say no anymore. Like if people are literally, I remember and I wasn't there, but like I've heard the stories. Right after New Relic went public, in like 2012 or early 2013, um, like they literally could not say no to business. There were so many people like showing up asking them just for order forms that reps were blowing their numbers and not working 45 days out of a quarter because they were closing business so fast. Um, I'm not saying you should wait that long to like grow your sales team or expand your product, but like certainly they had what I would call radical product market fit at that point. There were no questions that you could go add people to that organization and make more money. I don't think most companies that try to endeavor through growing through headcount are at that point. And so yeah, I mean, a lot of it's like figure out how you absolutely have product market fit, and it's not you convincing yourself; it's the rest of the world telling you because they're banging at your door, they're inbounding at such like a level where now you have to rise to meet the occasion rather than find the occasion to meet your growing team.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, find that product market fit, and sounds like you're also there's elements of like make sure you are paying attention and optimizing the team and the people you got around you and
Yeah,
maintaining that pace. And I totally agree. It's like when you're moving really fast, you hire great people, right? But sometimes great people are not still the right people.
yeah,
And I think that's tough when you're moving fast, and it's those are lessons learned, right, as you go
yeah.
forward. So, wrap us up maybe by just doing a quick, like, given all that, like, you mentioned AI a couple of times, and I would imagine AI's got to be something you guys are thinking about. You have a lot of data and stuff. Like, what is go the other way? What's the future hold? You think for Embrace?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Yeah, I kind of alluded to it. We're really starting to do some stuff around how we build AI that can be assistive in you, kind of defining the boundaries of the things you want to look like and helping you understand the data. Mm. I'm excited about how we can employ AI to do things that were like time costly, but not necessarily super high leverage from a human perspective, increasingly. And that's like, that's things like that. Like we know things are clustered around a common time period. We can kind of place them on an affinity map. Is there a way we can train a model to say, hey, these things all kind of make sense together? Tell me what this step looks like. And, that helps us define data shapes. I, I have quite a bit of skepticism that some of the things that are, we are broadly salaried employees, right? Like, and so there's a relatively fixed cost to us for an organization. I have some skepticism that right now the cost model of AI is a perfect fit for replicating all the things that our human brains are pretty good at doing around pattern recognition at scale. And that's simply because, I've seen it. It's pretty easy for enterprises to run up massive bills in a hurry, doing things that like if you employed a human to do, they probably could do. It just might take marginally longer. And I think historically, like our world, the observability world, and I had a friend who was an engineer say this. He's like, I wanted to set up New Relic and then just ignore it as much as possible. It was kind of an insurance policy that I hope never had to pay out. Mhm. I have a different take, which is that I think like great observability tech is something that ideally you're interacting with every day because you're using it as the control panel around what's going on in your software. And you're using it to constantly experiment and tweak. And if you shift to that paradigm, then like, the level of emergency should be far less insane. Like the house isn't burning down. It's just a spark that you say maybe not going to, could turn into a fire, but I want to address because I care about my overall quality. And in that, like, we can't have AI costing us $15,000 whenever there's something little thing is that the house isn't burning, right? Mm. Now, I could be totally wrong. They could figure out a way to like, decrease by tenfold or hundredfold the cost of AI. But right now, like, we did some like early experimentation with taking the play-by-plays that we have users going through, placing them in, a tokenized LLM, having to do comparisons. And it's like, well, something that if I go click, 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 I instantly saw that just cost me $15. And if I have 1,000 engineers in an organization doing that 10 times a day, the numbers start to add up pretty
Hmm.
quick. And so I think like very much TBD on that. I'm receptive to the idea. I would love to see it because I think it's a pretty cool idea. But like as a very pragmatic person, you obviously you can't just be technology can do this. It's like, is it the right thing for technology to do given the problems that your customers would actually prioritize and their willingness to pay for it?
Yeah, that's really insightful. And like you kind of unpacked something that's interesting about this AI boom, which is most of the consumer tools that people are used to engaging with, like ChatGPT, Gemini, they're either free or very inexpensive in terms of
Yeah.
the consumer version.
Yeah.
But like if you're a business building with it, you can very easily rack up a very large build
Yeah.
very quickly. And
Yeah.
I think the general public doesn't really see that. So these expectations of like, oh, whatever, just like hook it up to your AI and it's just gonna like do this stuff, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, hold up. Like, yeah, it's one of those things, even fixing bugs, right? Like in observability, right? It's like sometimes you get a thing and you're like, well, that only happened to like 1 out of 100,000 users. So it's kind of not even worth fixing that, you know? Kind of the
Well,
same
I
deal
mean,
here.
especially in mobile, by the way, because like if it's based on an outdated supposition, like by the time you fix it, given its lack of prevalence, you may have a new operating system, a new app version that totally wipes off the feature, etc. Right? So yeah, I mean, why would you
Yeah.
employ something that's going to cost you a couple $100 to do that at scale when it may not even be relevant
Yeah.
anymore?
Well, and that's where the AI thing could get really out of control, right? If you enable all these agents to just do all this stuff. So awesome, awesome conversation. If Embrace, if people wanted to learn more about your product, if they're hiring, how would they find you and Embrace?
Yeah. So we're at www.embrace.io. Don't just Google Embrace because you won't find us. Just because it's another lesson learned, but that was before my time. Name your company something where when people Google it, they can always find it. But so it goes. Yeah, those times are past.
Yeah.
They can also find me on, my name's really unique. So if you search me, Andrew Tunall, on LinkedIn, you will definitely find me. I'm the only one. That's good and bad. I'm on, I guess I'm on Instagram. I am technically on Twitter, but every day I'm threatening to leave. Yeah, so LinkedIn's probably a great way to connect with me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, there you go. If people are interested in this, should definitely check you out because you guys have an amazing tool and very thought leaders in this space and moving the needle. So thanks
Thanks,
a lot.
David.
Thanks for being on.
It's been great working with the VGB team too. I'm excited to see what you guys have next.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Cheers.